Hello all. Hopefully you've had a nice lunch. In the feedback session, I think you should put that there wasn't a delivery slot ordered by Terry Kingham. He's got enough money in the budget to do that, I think personally, and he'll be keeping Deliveroo and Uber Eats in business. And I think the fact that I didn't have lunch waiting for me delivered by Uber Eats, I think is just terrible. So in the feedback session, I think that needs to be raised. As a regional commissioner, he gets paid enough, doesn't he? I think personally. So yes. So welcome and thank you for joining me this afternoon. So I'm going to be delivering a drugs awareness session around, funny enough, around drugs. So I'll talk about kind of a little bit my background, I guess, around sort of drugs awareness in a second, but I'll just talk you through. So can everyone see this? It should be on content. Yeah, fantastic. So I'll do an introduction in a second. We'll do a little bit of a quiz. It's not going to be a difficult one, but it's just going to be literally true or false. So what I'd like you to do is, if everyone could just on a piece of paper, if you could write in big letters true and false. If you could do that for me whilst I'm going through that, that'd be brilliant. We'll talk about kind of different names of drugs and the slang that you might hear. We'll kind of look at a little bit of our own stereotypes in terms of what we think a drug user looks like. We'll talk a little bit around signs and symptoms, and I used my own kind of experience around what to look out for, really, when we're talking about drugs and signs and symptoms with not just young people, but with anyone really. So this is kind of a general session for young people, but it also can be related to family and friends. We'll talk about what tolerance is. I'm going to then share a previous client story. We'll call this person X for obviously confidentiality reasons. And we'll talk about the real impact that drugs has. And we'll kind of talk a little bit around what this means for our young people. So before we go on to the quiz, I'll just give a little bit of intro into who I am and kind of what my background is. So I am currently serving as a police officer within the Metropolitan Police for around sort of 8 years. But prior to that, I worked as a drug and alcohol practitioner for about 6 years. So previous to that, I worked in the private sector, and scouting had such a massive impact on my life that I kind of wanted to live that out, I guess, to live out BP's mantra of trying to leave the world a little bit better than we found it. So in 2007, I had an epiphany. For those of you that watch Angel and Buffy, I didn't have an epiphany where my soul came back as a vampire and reliving 200 years worth of murders. Instead, I had an epiphany that as cheesy as it sounds, I wanted to make a difference in the world. And I worked in the private sector for 10 years. And although it was good money and everything else, it wasn't really satisfying me personally. And so I started my journey into the public sector, and I worked at Feltham Young Offenders. So I worked at Feltham Young Offenders for about a year. So I worked with any young adult. So I worked on the B side, which was 18 to 21 year olds. So in the prison system, when you're 21 years and 10 months, you are then officially classed as an adult within the prison system. But because of the way the judicial system works, if you're 15 to 18, sometimes 14, 15 to 18, you'll go to the A side at Feltham Young Offenders. And if you're 18 to 21, you're still classed as a young adult within the prison system. So I worked with a variety of young men. So I worked with gang members, gang leaders, rapists, murderers, burglars, you name it, I worked with them. And it was all around kind of like talking about their addiction and doing work around how they could reduce their drug intake when they left prison, but also doing work around online harm reduction and stuff like that. So from there, I went to work at Wormwood Scrubs as a prison link worker. So I worked with the lads when they left prison and worked with them and engaged with them in the community. And then I worked as a so I did that for about a year and a half, and then I worked in the community as a DIP worker, so a drug intervention program worker. So that's where I worked in police stations, and I worked with. So there's certain categories where if you're nicked for those categories, you'll get drug tested. If you test positive for those categories, then you get a triage assessment by somebody like me. And the whole point of it is when we look at drugs and criminality, it often fits within 5 or 6 categories of offences. Theft, generally in that category, but burglary, shoplifting, fraud, robbery, kind of. But a lot of it is featured around that. So it's apart from shoplifting, it's the impact that has it's the offences that has the biggest impact on society. You know, we all know somebody probably that's been burgled, and it's a horrible experience. It's really horrible experience, but centered around everything that offenders do is through addiction. And so I guess, you know, my approach was always around working with that person to try and get them into treatment. And, you know, ultimately, if they get into treatment, then they're going to save us money on the taxpayer. And more importantly, seeing from the perspective that I do now, it means less victims. And if we have less victims of crime, then that can only be a good thing. So that's kind of been my journey, I guess, around sort of drugs and alcohol and stuff like that. And I deliver this session to explorers. It's not really suitable for scouts, mainly because of the language that I use. I don't mince my words. I do I do tell it as it is. I drop a F-bomb occasionally, not because I'm offensive to people, but because I just kind of get in the zone and talk about stuff. Separate to this, if you think for your county or district or group that you'd like me to run a session on Zoom around sort of drugs awareness, let me know. But if it will be later on, so after March, because I'm studying for my skipper's exam at the moment. So my time is work and studying, and then obviously in between scouting. So if we park that for later on. But what I'd like you all to do, first of all, is if you could, so hopefully the right slide will come up. So before we go on to the quiz, I want you to, no, I knew I'd do that. Bear with me. I'm just going to share the right one. I have to say I'm very sorry about this, but I'm working off an iPad at the moment, and to say that it's fiddly is the understatement of the year. Right. Okay, so you should all have, hopefully have a smartphone. So if you could go on to a website called mentimeter.com. I promise you it's not a phishing website, and there's no I'm not going to ask you to put in your credit card details or anything, but I'll give you a minute or so to go in that. So once you go into menti.com, it should ask you for a code. I'll do the same. And that code at the top, 574450. So if you could just name as many drugs as you can. I've given you 10 options. You don't have to fill all 10 in. If you can only think of a few, that's absolutely fine. But just think of as many drugs as you can. Hopefully that should. Oh, there we go. Cocaine, yes. Okay, we've got some yeah. So cocaine, alcohol, dust, yeah, meth, speed, yeah. Cocaine seems to be the popular one. Nicotine, yeah, skunk. Fantastic. Okay, brilliant. So we've all got a general understanding, haven't we? The whole point of that was just to highlight the fact that drugs is all around us. We all know that it's there. Young people are going to be affected by it, perhaps personally by trying it out and seeing where it goes and seeing the experimental side of it, or the reality of the other side of it is actually in their area where they're living, they will probably come across drug dealing. They'll see drug dealing. And actually, the impact that drug dealing and drugs has in the current climate that we're talking about is around that serious youth violence. And lots of people sort of talk to me about, well, because I work within youth engagement within the Met, and talking about, well, how do we reduce serious youth violence? And there's no one short answer. That's the reality. Because when we look at drug dealing as it is, as let's be brutal about this, it's a business. If you strip everything aside, it's a business. And it's exactly the same as this. If you've got a high street and in that high street is only one Costco and that's it, they've got all the business, right? Then over time, another coffee shop opens, then another one, another one. What will Costco do? They'll eventually lower their costs. They'll try and put new ideas in and stuff like that. Drug dealers don't have the know-how. Well, they probably have the know-how, but they can't just go around and say, right, come over here and put a sign up saying 2 for 1 or buy one get 2 free or anything like that. They can't do that like Tesco's does. So they have to resort to ways which they know, which is try to eliminate the competition. And they can't do that through courts and everything else. They do it through violence. And so when we talk about serious youth violence, actually it's much bigger than, right, okay, we can stop a young person drug dealing. But if that young person is earning £800 to £1,000 a week, no tax, no NHS, nothing like that, it doesn't come on a pay slip, just comes in cash. If they're not earning £800 to £1,000 a week and you're then trying to get them to work in a warehouse or work in Tesco's, whatever it might be, they're going to be earning a really, really small fraction of it. So we have to think about, well, actually, what else can we do to draw them away from it? And as you can see here, that whole list of drugs that we've spoken about, let's look at the illegal ones, billions and billions and billions of pounds, right? Absolute billions. I mean, we, in the Met, yes, of course, we try and reduce that, and we have departments that try and take out big drug dealers. The reality is we put a small dent in it. And that's, that's no one's fault. That's because the drug trade is so big. There's so much money involved. So let's move on to the quiz. And so I know you've got your signs up of true or false. So what I'd like you to do, I'm just going to read out the questions, and if you just put up whether or not you think it's true or false, and then we'll just give some stats around it. Okay. So cannabis can only be smoked. Is that true or false? False. Yeah, fantastic. That's exactly right. So cannabis, yes, it can be smoked. That's one way of having it. But you can have it in cakes. You can have it in a bong, where you're technically still smoking it, but you're not smoking it in the traditional sense in a joint. So yeah, there's lots of different ways that you can have cannabis, and actually they've got sort of oils now and other things like that. So using cocaine can lead to weight loss. True or false? False. A couple of trues. False. Thumbs up from Martin. So true. Yeah, it is true. And so the reason it can it leads to weight loss. I mean, obviously, this isn't something that Slimming World, I don't think, are going to advertise openly. But what cocaine does is, so cocaine is a powdered form. It's a white powdered form which you generally snort. You can put it on the gums. It goes into your bloodstream a little bit slower, but often people snort it up their nose because it's the quickest way to get the hit. But what cocaine does is that it suppresses your appetite. So when we talk about crack and cocaine, we're talking about one of the same thing. Crack is just washed up cocaine. So cocaine's the expensive version, generally around 40 to 50 pound a gram. And then crack is the other bit, which is, you know, a little rock will probably cost you 20, 25 quid, and that hit will last you probably 15 minutes or so. So it's what it does is when you watch people and you see their faces like that, they're all completely sullen. The reason they're like that is because what cocaine and crack does is it completely suppresses your appetite. So you don't need to eat. So actually, for weight loss, it's there. But when you see drug users and they're really gaunt in the face, and people are like, oh, yeah, that person looks like they're on heroin, they're not. Actually, it's the other way around. Drug users who only use heroin actually put on quite a lot of weight because their appetite is still there. They still get hungry. Whereas crack will completely suppress your appetite. The thing with crack is that crack is a massive high and cocaine is a massive high. The come down off it is really, really rubbish. So with cocaine, what people tend to do is take a lot of cocaine, then the come down happens, and all of a sudden, right, I need to get another high, I need to get another high, I need to get another high. And what they do is that they keep doing that because they need to get that high. Let's look at why people take drugs. It's to get a high. You don't take it because, you know, well, I just fancy spending my money and giving it to drug dealers. You want to get a high. And so that's why I use it. But yeah, cocaine, systemic use and long-term use, it suppresses your tiredness and your hunger. And actually, it kind of works out well because if you're a drug user, the last thing you want to think about is eating. You don't want to be thinking about that. You just want to be thinking about drugs. So yeah. Is it unsafe is it safe or unsafe to mix drugs? So is it unsafe to mix drugs? True or false? True. Yeah. Fantastic. So people do mix it. It's called snowballing. So when you mix heroin and crack, you have to mash it all up, make it into a liquid form, and then inject it, or put it on a crack, smoke it through a crack pipe. But yeah, so it is. But people do snowball. It's a really quick and efficient way to get high. But if you imagine this way, so cocaine does this to your body. It's an upper, and heroin's the downer. So your body is kind of like pulling in both ways, and actually the risk of overdose is massive. So when I was obviously working, I still kind of do stuff now. When I was working on Neighbours, and I speak to people about drugs, I still give out drug advice because that to me it's everyone's responsibility to do that. But yeah, I mean, I would often say, look, don't do snowballing. It's really not good for you. So last couple, sorry. Allowing people to use drugs in your home is a crime. True or false? Yeah. Okay, so it's a slight double-edged question there. So if you've got somebody in your house and they are smoking drugs and they're a resident in that house, that in itself isn't illegal. But if you open your house up to let people use that purely for drug taking, then yes, it is illegal. So essentially, what you'll see is terms like cuckooing, where often drug dealers will target vulnerable people and they'll get them to use their house for using drugs. Now, often the person whose house it is vulnerable with mental health, they're not going to be prosecuted. So technically, have they broken the law? Yeah. But the whole point of this is, well, actually, when we speak to our young people, what are we going to be doing when they're potentially going to a party or having a party, or they're going to invite some friends around with that intention of getting them to use drugs? They're breaking the law. So it's all about awareness for this sort of stuff. And the last thing is, obviously, it's related to our young people. True or false? If you are under 18, you can receive a cannabis warning. false, true, true, yeah, true. No, so it's false. So if you're under 18, you cannot receive a cannabis warning. So if we're out and about and speaking, and we see a group of young people, 3 of them are over 18, 1 of them is under 18. The person that's under 18 will be arrested and taken to a police station. Now, the reason for that is A, they can't get a cannabis warning, and B, they're a minor, they're a child, so we need to have that take that responsibility for that young person. When I do this with explorers, they all go, that's not fair. I'm 16 now. Why can't I get a cannabis warning? And I'm like, well, how often are you smoking drugs? And to which they go, okay, yeah. But it's a good thing for explorers to know, because if they're going to be with a group of friends and they're passing around cannabis to each other, they need to know the implications of potentially what's going to happen. Now, when I deliver these sessions to explorers, I always advocate that I'm not telling them that it's okay to use drugs. If anybody asks me, would I ever say use drugs? Of course not, never, because I've seen the devastating effect it can have. But rather than just saying to young people, don't do drugs, the Frank advert that used to do it, actually, it's going to go in one ear and out the other. But if you explain to them why they shouldn't use drugs, and explain to them, look, from my experience, look, it's an informed choice. I'm giving you information. It's up to you how you use it. I would say you don't use drugs because this is what I've seen from my experience. And so young people generally seem to get on with it, which is quite good. So we're going to move on to drugs and language. So I've just put this up there because we talk about cocaine, crack, heroin, cannabis. Actually, a lot of young people will just use nicknames for it. So these are only some. There's loads of nicknames. And actually, it's being updated all the time. But for cocaine, Charlie, Blow, Coca, Coke, Columbia. There's so many different names. So for crack, as I said, Apple Jacks, Black Rock, Hard Rock. And actually, when you look at Black Rock, so it's not to do with the color distortion of the actual drug. It's because back in the probably 90s, I would say, so cocaine was labeled as white man drug, and you've seen it down here. I think it says it somewhere down here. Yeah, so poor man's cocaine, which is what they call crack, because it's cheaper. It's pardon my language here, but it's the leftover shit that drug dealers wash up and they don't really want to do much with, but ultimately, if they sell it, they're going to make some money off it. So you can still make a lot of money off crack. And it used to be known as, cocaine used to be known as white man drug, and crack was known as black man drug. And I'm not saying anything that's offensive to anybody, I hope not, but that's what it used to be called. When, and we used to openly say that. And it's really interesting, when I used to speak to the lads in prison, they would often say, oh, he's a crackhead, or they're a crackhead, or whatever it might be, but they'd be perfectly acceptable and happy to use cocaine. So they're happy to go out on a Friday night or whatever it might be. Yeah, we'll just do a bit of Charlie. And I'll ask them the same question, but would you do crack? No, they're a crackhead. And it's really interesting when you think about it. It's almost the biases that they have within that whole criminality world of, well, I'll be associated with cocaine because that's okay, because that's an expensive drug. And, everyone takes it, so it's okay. But crack, oh, no, I wouldn't do that. That's just for addicts. And part of this is about just explaining to people the differences around this stuff and the impact that it can have. So as I said, marijuana, cannabis is, the list goes on. There's so many different names for cannabis. The thing with, we'll come on to this a little bit later, but cannabis, you often know the smell of it because it's got quite a strong, potent smell. No one can describe what cannabis smells like, but everyone knows what cannabis smells like. So when you're walking down the road, you're like, oh, yeah, someone's blunting weed, definitely. You know it because of the smell of it. So, again, what would you do? If you've got a young person coming in and they're smelling of cannabis, they're either that they've more likely smoked it, or potentially, even if they're carrying it on them and they're dealing, they will still have that really strong residual smell around them, and it will stay on their clothes for quite a while. So again, all of these are, and we'll come on to the signs and symptoms in a little bit, but all of these are warning signs to see what we can do with young people. So, right, we're going to use our good friend Mentimeter again. So if you just bear with me for a second, I'm going to, right, so I'm just going to get you to sharing that. So hopefully, so do the names get made up to disguise it from non-drug users? Yes and no. It's mainly to disguise it from the police. So when drug dealers are talking to each other, they don't want to. They often don't want us to know what's going on. So yeah, it is to hide it, but often from us. So just looking at that, which one do you think, if you were to look at that person, an investment trader, electrician, or a homeless person, at first sight, which one would you say out of those is the drug user? Brilliant. So this investment person is taking a real hammering, aren't they?
Sorry, I'm working in an investment bank, and I think this image is from Wolf of Wall Street, like the 80s, 90s, just before 9/11, before Lehman defaulted. Yeah, so the income in investment banking has come down drastically, and on the other side, compliance is much more important. So I think this image is a bit outdated.
Yeah, no.
So I'm working in that industry since 30 years now, and I've seen a lot of faces, a lot of people, and there was nobody I could point the finger at.
Yeah, no. So there's a reason behind this, and it's and I'll come on to it in a second. So we've got 9 replies out of 18. So I'll go with that. That's fine. So those that pick the investment trader, do you want to just anyone want to just briefly say why they picked that person?
It's probably because of what Martin just said, and also because I'm just consciously trying to avoid the stereotype.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
From my background isn't necessarily in investment trading, but I've always noticed that people that have a lot of money and are high earners do tend to use a lot of cocaine.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. And so the reason that I put those 3 up is because so they're 3 clients that I've actually worked with. Okay, so I worked with an investment trader who was arrested for possessing some cocaine, and his actual addiction got really, really bad. It started off on the typical Friday, Saturday night. That was it, right? It was just going out. Usually, actually, for most of the times with his work colleagues, Friday after work, a whole group of them. That's what they would do, and you know that was part of their life. It then crept in where it became Friday and Saturday, and then you started to miss it throughout the week and started to get, you know, that the urge of wanting it more and more and more, and soon it ended up being a daily habit where he was doing it at work. And so this person ended up coming into treatment because he really wanted to just get some help. And the electrician is somebody that I worked with. Worked Monday to Friday, worked really hard, family, kids, the works. Friday, Saturday night, we'll go out with the lads, have 10 beers, and take cocaine as well. And so he got arrested because ended up getting into a fight and happened to have cocaine with him. But the whole point that I was trying to make with this is that often when I speak to explorers, and actually I ask them, just literally put that up, and it's about understanding your own bias. And most of the explorers often go to the homeless person. They often think, well, if I saw a homeless person, I'd just assume that they're a drug user as well. Actually, the homeless person that I worked with had been street homeless for about 30 years. Never taken drugs in his life. Alcohol, yes. I mean, I know it's officially a drug, but never taken any illegal substances. And that was their addiction. But I think when we look at stereotypes, we often think, well, actually, you know, I think that person could be a drug user, or that person could be. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that anyone can be, and to really kind of hammer that home, because when we look at and speak to our explorers, and our young people, most of our young people are going to be fantastic kind of role models, and great members of society. But the reality is those young people will have a past. My personal background with scouting is that, when I was younger, I was involved in, well, we didn't call it a gang, but it was just a group of mates that I hung out with. I wasn't the clever kid, I wasn't the sporty kid, I wasn't the cool kid. So I hung around with the other kids, and the other kids bunked off school and smoked drugs. And that's where my life would have gone. I knocked about with those lads on the weekends and whenever, really, at the same time as doing scouting, funny enough. So I kind of had this parallel life where I'd go to scouts and learn values and skills for life, and then I'd knock about with my mates and get up to some silly mischief. But all of that came to head when I was about 17. They decided to burgle a building which happened to be opposite Hounslow Police Station. And when they came out of the building, funny enough, there were coppers waiting for them, and they got nicked. But for whatever reason, that night I decided to go home. And I was about 17 when this happened, and I was a real crossroads in my life. Up until that point, I was with them. I didn't smoke drugs like all the time, but yeah, I partook in it and drank and just got up to silliness. And when I was about 17, my event scout leader, Paul Dixon, basically said to me, "Look, mate, you've got a choice here. You're coming to the age now where if you get nicked for this stuff, this is going to stay with you for life. So you've got a choice here about getting away from this." And so I kind of had this in my mind of, do I, don't I, what do I do? And as I said, I didn't go out with them that night, and they ended up all getting nicked. 3 of them ended up back in prison because they were on license recall, and the other few had a community order. Now, that was a moment of my life where I was like, I've got to turn this around. I have to stop doing this. And I focused all my energy into my Queen Scout Award and scouting. And so when I talk about this stuff, I talk about positive interventions, because one of the interventions that I had was a police officer, and it was a local bobby. Back then, we had local bobbies. But I used to see this officer all the time. And what he would do is, when we all used to mess about, he used to basically bung us in the back of a van and used to drive us to Heathrow Airport, and literally just drop us off at Heathrow Airport and tell us all to walk back. But he never, ever made me walk back, ever. And every time, always on the journey back in the van, he would say to me, "What are you doing with these guys, Kaya? Like, you're not a bad person. I know these people because I've arrested them. I know what they like, their mantra and everything about them is, you're not a bad person. So why are you hanging around with these guys? If you carry on, you're going to end up down a really bad path, and you're not going to be able to come back from it." And part of that intervention, part of scouting, was the thing that saved my life. Had I still been knocking around with those lads, I'd probably be in prison or dead. 2 of my mates that I used to knock about with are dead, sadly, and a couple of them are in prison. And the ones that aren't in prison, they either are taking drugs or they're battling addiction. And so, I kind of think back to my life then and where it is now. And when I talk to young people, yes, some of this stuff is going to be quite raw, and some leaders may look at it going, "Well, I'm not sure we should be talking to our young people about this." Actually, I think the complete opposite, because as I said before, some of you sat in on the CT badge that we're talking about, the counterterrorism badge and radicalization. It's our responsibility as leaders to impart knowledge to our young people so that they can make informed choices. And hopefully we guide them in the right way, where they make the right informed choices and positive choices. But we still have a responsibility, I think, to think outside the box and talk about this stuff to them. And so I appreciate not everyone's going to be able to have this conversation with young people. I fully appreciate that. And so, the offer is out there. If you do want me to speak to your explorers about this subject, then let me know. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about tolerance levels. And I use this analogy quite a lot with people. So it's exactly that, a ladder. So that first step on the ladder is when you first smoke drugs. We'll use cannabis as an example. Often, when you first smoke cannabis, you'll get a massive high, right? And usually, if like £5 bag, you'll split it between 3 or 4 of you. Why? Because it's really strong. Like, you're not going to get high. You won't be able to smoke it on your own. But what eventually happens is you as I said earlier on, the reason that you smoke drugs and take drugs is to get high. So you're on that first step ladder of getting a high. Great. Little while goes by, and what will happen is you'll go to that first step, and then you realize, well, actually, do you know what? I'm sharing this, but I'm not getting a high anymore. I need a little bit more. So you then buy a £10 bag between 3 or 4 of you, whatever it might be. There you go. You're on the second step now, but you've got your high, and that's the main thing. Time goes on, and you're now at a level where, right, okay, actually, do you know what? I don't want to share my cannabis anymore. I just want it on my own. So I don't want to share £5 worth. I want £5 on my own. So I buy a £5 bag, bang. Let's say you're on that ladder now on your own, right? No, you're not sharing your drugs with anyone else. You're on that first step, spending £5. Time passes on. Actually, that £5 isn't doing anything. Do you know what I've got to do? I've got to spend £10. £10, bang, there we go. There's my high. Fantastic. Time passes on. That £10 becomes £20 because that first £15 isn't going to do anything. It's the last £5 that's going to get you the high. Great, fantastic. You're now spending £20 a week to get high. Or every time you smoke cannabis, sorry. Time passes on. Less time now because your tolerance levels are getting higher now. So less time passes and you're on that fourth step. You need to now spend £25. And all of a sudden, what else is reduced is the amount of time that passes between you stopping cannabis and then your next hit. So you're now into a matter of days. Let's say 3 times a week. So 3 times a week, you're spending £25 because you need to get that high. And then the drug dealer says, well, actually, you know what, mate? You don't want to spend £25 a week. You're spending, £25 a time. So that's, £75 a week. That's a lot of money. When you take a little bit of heroin, oh, no, never doing that. Never, ever doing that brown stuff. Trust me, look, I'm not going to inject it. Never going to inject it. You don't need to inject it. All you do, there's a bit of foil, light it at the bottom, chase the dragon, bang, there's your high. And it's a high that you've never expected before. And all of a sudden now, that cannabis ladder's gone out the window and a new ladder's been replaced. You're on this ladder now. You're on the heroin ladder. And so you gradually go up the same steps again. That £10 hit is doing it for a little while until you hit that level. And you need to get to that second point. Remember the steps, right? Why is it we want to take drugs? I want to get that hit. So if I'm on that first ladder, it's not doing anything for me anymore. It's not exciting. It's not giving me the hit. I need to go to that second place. So I get my hit. Perfect. And we carry on and carry on. And another drug user says, you know what? Why are you smoking it, mate? You're just wasting money. Just inject it. No, I couldn't inject it. I'm never going to inject it in my groin. No. You don't need to inject it in your groin. Inject it in your arms or your legs. You just keep rotating your injecting sites. You'll be fine. And then all of a sudden, you're now on the same ladder, but you're now injecting. You've upped the ante. And all of a sudden, what happens is you're injecting more. And you're spending 60, 70, 80 pounds a week, sometimes a day, to maintain this drug habit. How do you do it? You can't do it by doing a paper round, because that takes time. So you need to do what? Criminality, of course. And the reason that I talk about this tolerance levels is that I did a survey when I worked back in Hounslow, and I asked about 100 different clients the questions around, if you had a choice, that first time you stepped on that ladder, what would you do? And they all said, I would never have done it, never in a million years. So the thing I speak to young people about is it's an informed choice. Ask yourself, if I step on that ladder, take that risk, knowing that at some point it could lead me to being, spending more and more money, because that's what happens. Would I take that risk? And it moves us quite nicely onto person X. So this person, somebody that I worked with, they were exactly that on that ladder, right? Went to a really good school, had parents were middle-class parents, both worked, good from a good family, just experimented to try cannabis. So they tried cannabis, enjoyed it. They were that mixture, kind of like buying drugs with 3 or 4 mates, until eventually it wasn't enough. They needed to smoke drugs on their own. And actually their cannabis habit ended up being around about sort of £200 to £300 a week. Now they didn't graduate to the next level in terms of heroin, because they didn't want to do that. But what they couldn't do was pay off their debt. And what eventually happened is this young person or this young adult, ended up carrying something for someone. It was pretty much as you see in the movies. It was a package in a bag taken from A to B. Unfortunately, between A and B, the police got wind of it and he was arrested. Ended up in prison. Now, what he didn't do was look inside and realize what he was actually carrying. What he was carrying was a very large drug shipment worth a lot of money. And so when he went to prison, although he was nicked and the drugs was taken, that debt doesn't go away. Drug dealers don't go, oh, you were caught by the police. Oh, I'm so sorry. Do you know what? That £50,000 debt that you've got, we'll write it off because it wasn't your fault. That doesn't happen. So his debt was there. And whilst he was in prison, he didn't have the greatest of time. Before he went into prison, his family were asked to try and pay the money. Family couldn't do it. And what happened to him in prison was, so prisoners will do this thing where they'll warm up water and put sugar in it, so it crystallizes. But before it crystallizes, if you throw it on someone's face or back, it will harden. And that's exactly what happened to him. So it was thrown on his back, and he was horrific. His back was horrific. And what eventually happened is he stood trial, went to prison, got sentenced. That debt still didn't go away. The family couldn't afford to pay, although they were working. This was a fair amount of debt. When he came out of prison, he was shot and killed. Now, I tell that story to explorers. It's a client that I worked with. It's never particularly nice retelling that story because you do ask yourself, well, what could I have done? Should I have done more? Could I have done more? Probably not, is the reality. But when I speak to explorers, I ask them that very question. Person X had a choice of when he first bought that £10 bag with his friends, whether he carried on smoking it and doing whatever he was doing. It led him down that path where he couldn't pay the debt back. And the only way to, unfortunately, on the street, that's how it works. It works with violence. If you're a grass, you probably won't last very long on the street. If you get into debt and get in trouble, we don't talk about this over a coffee. It's done in a different way. And, the way that his life ended, unfortunately, that's the way it is. So when we talk about this stuff and we talk about the impact on our young people, so I talk about this because there's two main areas that we need to think about. County lines is one of them. So county lines is essentially where drug dealers, they always say it's from London. It's not always from London. It's all over the bloody country. But they basically go to rural towns and then they set up a house, and a phone is that phone is the county line. And what they will do is get young people from inner city areas, ship them out to these rural towns and get them to drug deal. It's a big problem. The media will have you say that it's a problem that's happening in the last year, and the Metropolitan Police aren't doing anything about it. That's far from the truth. And actually, it's far from the truth that it's a new problem. This has been going on for years and years. When you look at Oliver Twist, what do you think that is? Yeah, all right, Fagan's having a good laugh with the kids. But actually, if you strip it all back, it's pretty much county lines. So this isn't new. But it is something that we need to have a think about. And the other part of it is that addiction bit. So the whole bit around, how is this going to happen? What's going to happen? If it goes down this road, and I told you about that when we talk about addiction, why people use drugs and why they commit crime. This is how I summarize it, addiction. I've got a question, so I'll answer that as well. When you wake up in the morning, what's the first thing you think of? Oh, I need to go for a pee. But apart from that, I want a coffee, I want a tea, right? That's the first thing most of us think of. A drug user, when they first wake up, the very first thought is, where am I going to get my drugs? How am I going to get my drugs? And they pretty much go in tandem, right? They go hand in hand, those two. Because the I need drugs is their body telling them, that's the addiction bit. How am I going to do it? That's the criminality. So actually, how do we battle this? How do we get over this? Well, to me, informing our young people as early as possible about the outcomes and that can happen by even trying drugs. And we need to be speaking to our young people about this because, as I said earlier on, it's about giving our young people informed choices so that they can go out in society and make the right decisions in a positive way. So do young people say it won't happen to me? Yeah, I mean, yeah. In short, and when I worked at Feltham, you know, if you're 21 years old, you don't understand the impact of addiction. Why? Because you're 21, your body's young, your body's agile, it's going to be fine. Most of the clients that I worked with, were between 40 and 50. They'd often been using drugs for about 20 years. So the average drug cycle for most drug users is around 20 to 25 years. The outcome, which what will happen, is one of two things. Either they'll die, or at some point they'll hopefully get help. But most drug users, when we talk about a cycle of a drug user's life, so getting arrested, going into the prison system, coming out, getting help, support, etc., that has to happen around on average 15 times before they get help and support, or before they realize this is for me. And the thing about addiction and battling addiction and moving things forwards from addiction, it has to come from you. It has to be fundamentally centered from you. If you're doing it for a friend or a family or a loved one or whatever else, it's not going to work. Because what happens if that friend or family or loved one isn't there anymore? Where's your reason for stopping drugs? And so when I talk about this, often young people don't see the danger of it because they haven't gone to prison, or they haven't gone to adult prison, they haven't gone to scrubs, they haven't, being really blunt here, they haven't woken up in a crack house with a needle sticking out of them. That's the reality of drugs, where it leads to. And so when young people talk about it, yeah, they do, because you can't blame them. If you're young, of course you're going to think you're inevitable, you're invincible, sorry. But yeah, I think we're pretty much at time. So I hope that you've found it somewhat useful.